5:17 in the evening, February the 8th, 1969, Diggle Station, West Yorkshire. A signalman reaches for the lever that controls the down-home signal. It does not move. He pulls harder. Nothing. The steel rod connecting his signal box to the semaphore arm outside has become a single frozen column of ice. Every joint, every pivot, every mechanical linkage in the entire signalling system has seized solid. He tries the next lever, same result, and the next. The whole frame is locked. Outside, somewhere beyond the white curtain of driving snow, the 1705 express from Liverpool is approaching, locomotive 174 at its head, and right now, there is no way to tell the driver whether the line ahead is clear or blocked. The signalman picks up a hand lamp, red filter, steps out into the storm. This is how Britain's railway network operated that night. Not with technology, not with engineering, with a man, a lamp, and a set of hand signals older than the Victorian era. The winter of 1969 had been building its assault on northern England for weeks. January had brought persistent frost and scattered snow showers across the north. Roads in the Pennine villages had been treacherous since Christmas. Farmers on the high moors were already supplementary feeding livestock, hauling bales across frozen fields by tractor and by hand. But the first week of February brought something different. Something that transformed routine bad weather into genuine crisis. A deep low-pressure system tracking across the Atlantic collided with a mass of bitterly cold continental air sitting over Scandinavia. The collision happened directly over the British Isles. The result was a blizzard of extraordinary violence focused directly on the Pennine Hills. Meteorological stations across the north recorded barometric pressure dropping sharply through the afternoon of February the 7th. By evening, the first heavy snow had begun. Diggle sits at the western mouth of the Standedge tunnel, the longest canal tunnel in Britain, bored through the Pennine Ridge between Yorkshire and Lancashire. The railway tunnel alongside it carries the Trans-Pennine route, one of the most strategically important rail corridors in northern England. In 1969, this line connected Liverpool and Manchester to Leeds, Huddersfield, and the industrial towns of the West Riding. Thousands of commuters depended on it daily. The station itself perches at an altitude of roughly 230 metres above sea level, exposed, windswept. The surrounding moorland offers zero shelter from weather approaching from the west. When conditions deteriorate in the Pennines, Diggle is among the first places to feel it. By the morning of February the 8th, temperatures at Diggle had dropped to -8 degrees Celsius. Wind speeds were gusting above 50 miles per hour. Snow had been falling continuously for over 14 hours. But it was not the snow alone that caused the catastrophe. It was the combination of extreme cold, high wind and moisture. The wind drove snow horizontally across the tracks. It packed into every gap, every crevice, every mechanical component exposed to the elements. And then the moisture froze, not gradually, almost instantly. The metal surfaces were so cold that any snow making contact with the signal mechanisms melted fractionally from the residual warmth of the steel, then refroze as solid ice within seconds. The semaphore signalling system at Diggle was a product of 19th century mechanical engineering. Levers in the signal box connected to signal arms and point mechanisms through a network of steel rods and wire cables, running at ground level alongside the tracks. These rods passed through guide pulleys, compensating cranks, and detection bars. Every one of these components required freedom of movement to function. Every one of them was now encased in ice. Point heaters were operational elsewhere on the Trans-Pennine route that night. Gas-fired burners positioned beside the rail switches kept points clear at major junctions. But the signal mechanisms themselves had no such protection. Nobody had designed a heating system for signal rods. Nobody had imagined they would need one. The signalman at Diggle that evening was not alone in his predicament. Signal boxes across the high Pennine section were reporting the same failure. Marsden, the next station east, had partial signal failure. Saddleworth to the west was struggling with frozen points despite the heaters. But Diggle had the worst of it. Total signal failure. Every arm locked in whatever position it had been in when the ice took hold. The rule book was clear on this situation. When signalling equipment fails, train movements must be controlled by hand signals. The signalman must position himself where he can be seen by approaching drivers and use a combination of coloured lamps and arm movements to communicate stop, caution, or proceed. In a warm signal box, this is a simple instruction to read. Standing on an exposed platform in a Pennine blizzard, with visibility reduced to less than 30 metres, it is something else entirely. The first real test came with the 1705 from Liverpool. This service, hauled by Locomotive 174, a diesel unit working the Trans-Pennine diagram, had already been running late. Delays at Manchester Victoria, slow running through Stalybridge. By the time it approached Diggle, it was nearly 40 minutes behind schedule. The driver of 174 could see almost nothing ahead. Snow was hitting the windscreen faster than the wipers could clear it. The headlight illuminated a solid wall of white. Somewhere in that white, he knew, was Diggle Station and the entrance to the Standedge tunnel beyond it. What he saw first was not a signal. It was a red lamp, swinging slowly from side to side. A hand signal. Stop. He brought 174 to a stand. A figure appeared out of the snow beside the cab. The signalman, coated in ice, explained the situation. Signals inoperative. Proceed on hand, signals only. Caution through the station. The driver acknowledged. The signalman walked ahead to the platform end, raised his lamp showing green, and waved the train forward. 174 moved off, slowly, carefully. The driver kept his speed to no more than 5 miles per hour, peering through the narrow cleared arc of windscreen for any obstruction ahead, and within 400 metres it hit the first drift. The snowdrifts around Diggle had been forming since early afternoon. The geography of the cutting approaching the tunnel mouth acted as a natural snow trap. The land rises steeply on both sides, creating a channel that funnels the prevailing westerly wind directly along the railway alignment. Snow carried across the open moor dropped its load precisely where the railway ran. Drifts formed with remarkable speed. A section of track that had been passable at 3 o'clock was buried under a metre of snow by 5. By early evening, drifts in the cutting had reached depths of over 2 metres in places. Some were hard packed by the wind to the consistency of compacted earth. 174 ploughed into the first drift at perhaps 10 miles per hour. The locomotive pushed through perhaps 50 metres before losing traction. The wheels spun. The drift had packed so tightly that the front of the locomotive was effectively hitting a wall of compressed snow and ice. The driver reversed, backed up several hundred metres, tried again. More speed this time. The locomotive hit the drift with greater momentum, carved further in but stopped again. Snow was packing underneath the vehicle, lifting the wheels fractionally off the rails. No grip. Third attempt. The driver reversed almost back to the platform. The signalman, still out in the blizzard, cleared the approach with his hand lamp. 174 charged the drift at maximum safe speed for the conditions. The locomotive hit the wall of snow with a sound like a muffled explosion. Snow erupted over both sides of the cutting, thrown 5 or 6 metres into the air. The locomotive shuddered, slowed, nearly stopped. Then the wheels found grip on a section of rail that the compression of previous attempts had partially cleared. 174 lurched forward and burst through into a clearer section beyond. It had taken 3 attempts and nearly 25 minutes to cover a distance of less than half a mile. The front of the locomotive was packed solid with compacted snow. Ice hung from the buffers and the coupling gear. But the train was through. The driver inched 174 into the mouth of the Standedge tunnel, where the temperature was above freezing, and the relief from the wind was immediate and startling. But 174 was not the only train in difficulty that night. Behind it, a stopping service from Manchester had been held at Saddleworth. 2 more services were stacking up further west, and coming from the east, a Leeds to Manchester express had entered the Standedge tunnel, but was now crawling through at walking pace, the driver unsure of conditions at the western portal. The signalman at Diggle was now managing all of this traffic by hand. No block instruments, no telegraph communication with adjacent boxes, because the phone lines had also been affected by the storm. Overhead wires had collected ice and snapped under the weight. He was working from memory, timing and the rulebook, calculating safe intervals between trains based on the time each one had passed his station. He kept a pencil record on a scrap of paper, noting each movement, each time, each direction. The paper was damp. The pencil kept slipping in his frozen fingers. But the record was essential. Without it, in the confusion of the storm, he could lose track of where trains were on his section, and that could not happen. This was railwaying stripped back to its most elemental form. 1 man, a lamp, the rules he had memorized, and the knowledge that if he made a single error in judgment, 2 trains could meet head-on in a cutting buried under 2 meters of snow. By 8 o'clock that evening, the situation had deteriorated further. A second train had become stuck in drifts east of the station, blocking the upline completely. A diesel multiple unit on a local service had stalled between Saddleworth and Diggle when snow ingested through its engine compartment ventilation caused a power unit to shut down. Passengers on this train sat in unheated carriages in darkness for over an hour before a rescue locomotive could reach them. Some passengers later reported that frost had formed on the inside of the carriage windows. A mother travelling with 2 young children wrapped them in every coat and scarf available in the compartment. When rescue finally came, the passengers had to wade through knee-deep snow on the trackside to reach the relief train. The signalman had been working outside in the open for nearly 3 hours by this point. Temperatures had dropped further, to -10. His lamp was icing over. He had to keep clearing the coloured filters with his gloved hands to ensure drivers could distinguish red from green. His footprints on the platform filled with fresh snow within minutes of being made. Relief came gradually. A permanent way gang of 8 men arrived from Huddersfield around 9:30, having fought their way up the valley by road in a Bedford truck that had nearly become stuck twice on the climb above Marsden. They brought paraffin heaters and began the slow process of de-icing the signal mechanism. Boiling water was tried first. It cleared the ice momentarily, then froze again almost immediately in the extreme cold. Paraffin torches proved more effective, but the work was painstaking. Each rod, each crank, each pivot had to be heated individually. By midnight, partial signalling had been restored. The down-home signal could be operated, though stiffly. 2 of the 4-point mechanisms were freed. It was enough to run a basic service, though at drastically reduced speed and frequency. The full signalling system at Diggle was not restored to normal operation for another 36 hours. What happened at Diggle on February 8, 1969 was not unique. Signal failures due to freezing occurred across the Pennine route that winter. Similar incidents were reported in Scotland, in North Wales, and across the North York moors. But Diggle became the most cited example in subsequent British Railways internal reviews precisely because of its completeness. Total failure. Every signal, every mechanism, all at once. The incident exposed a fundamental vulnerability in the mechanical signalling system that had served British Railways since the 1870s. The technology was robust, reliable, and well understood. It had survived 2 world wars, countless storms, and decades of underinvestment. But it had a critical weakness. It required mechanical components to move freely in open air, and when the air turned hostile enough, those components simply stopped. The irony was that the solution already existed. Colour light signalling, operated electrically, had been installed on many main lines across Britain since the 1930s. The Southern Railway had pioneered the technology. The East Coast Main Line had adopted it extensively. These signals had no moving external parts, no rods, no cables, no pivots to freeze. A sealed electrical unit with coloured lenses illuminated by filament bulbs. They were effectively immune to the kind of failure that paralysed Diggle. The bulbs generated enough residual heat to keep their own lenses clear of ice. But the Trans-Pennine route, despite its strategic importance as the primary rail link between Lancashire and Yorkshire, had not been prioritised for resignaling. Budget constraints, other routes deemed more urgent, the usual calculations that always seemed reasonable until the weather proved them wrong. After 1969, those calculations changed. The Diggle incident, along with similar failures across the network, added weight to the argument for accelerating the modernisation of signalling on exposed routes. It was not the only factor. Cost, capacity, and operational efficiency all played their parts, but the image of a signalman standing in a blizzard with a hand lamp, controlling an express service by methods unchanged since 1840, concentrated minds. The mechanical signals at Diggle were eventually replaced, the manual signal box closed. The levers, the rods, the cranks that had frozen solid that February night were removed and scrapped. Modern colour light signals now guard the approaches to the Standedge tunnel. They do not freeze. But the lesson of Diggle is not really about signalling technology. It is about the gap between what systems are designed to endure and what nature actually delivers. The semaphore system worked perfectly in the conditions it was built for. Generations of signalmen had operated it through rain, wind, fog, and ordinary winter cold without incident. It failed only when conditions exceeded every assumption its designers had made, when the temperature dropped below anything the Victorians had planned for, when ice formed faster than any human could clear it. And when it failed, what remained was the most basic element of railway safety: a human being standing in the dark holding a lamp making decisions that kept people alive. No technology, no automation, just training, discipline, and the willingness to stand in a storm when every instinct said to go inside. The signalman at Diggle that night received no commendation, no medal, no public recognition. He did his job, he followed the rules. He stood in a blizzard for 3 hours and kept the trains moving. It worked.